Hi, Mom. I'm at work. Here's my spaceflight hat. And I have a reply video for you for your first block class. I wrote all the questions and the answers down for you, so I'm just going to read off and tell you. I did a lot of research for you all because I don't know the answers to all of these questions. There's 17 questions on here. Okay, so the first one, Adeline asked, if you had somewhere to put air on Mars, would it just float away? And I researched this, and we're not really sure yet. One Mars aficionado, Robert Zubrin, thinks that the atmosphere, that the air would stay. But there's a lot of research that's going on as to why Mars doesn't currently have a lot of oxygen in its atmosphere, or a very big atmosphere. And part of it is that it doesn't right now have a magnetic field, and that would have stripped away some of the atmosphere because of the solar wind that comes from the sun. And the other reason would be that Mars has low gravity, so it might be hard to hold on to it. But Robert Zubrin really wants us to travel to Mars and try to live on Mars, so I think he's very hopeful that we would be able to have an atmosphere. But we don't know right now. Number 2, Alyssa, why is Mars red? Mars is red because there's a lot of iron oxide in the soil. And iron oxide is the chemical word, the name for rust. So there's a lot of rust in the soil. Logan asks, why is Pluto called a dwarf planet when it's bigger than Mercury? Actually, Pluto is not bigger than Mercury. It is about half the diameter and about an eighth of the volume. Mercury is 4,879 kilometers in diameter, and Pluto is 2,360 kilometers in diameter. So Pluto is definitely smaller than Mercury, though they're both small compared to Earth. Darian asked, what happens if you get sucked into a black hole? Do you die? We actually don't know, because we've never, as humans, been that close to a black hole. We used to believe that nothing could survive the event horizon of a black hole, but now some physicists wonder if a black hole is actually a wormhole, that when you go through it will be like a transportation system that will spit you out somewhere in the universe. And we're not really sure about that yet. Bryn asks, what is a flight test engineer? A test engineer of any type is a person who tests a system on a piece of hardware or software. There are software test engineers who test software, and hardware test engineers. The kind of testing I've done for this company, the space company, is to test their avionics, which is the hardware and software that talks to the satellite deployers that spit out the satellites. And so you have to test the systems by simulating the thing they're supposed to do. Pretend that you do the test. So simulating satellite deployment would be sending the kinds of signals that would deploy the satellites and checking that you get the right kind of voltage and current, and that you see, say, a door actually open if it's supposed to open. So you try to make it do what it's supposed to do and see if it does it, and then you record the results, and if it's broken, then you have to fix it and maybe redesign it. Lucy asks, have any people gone on Mars, and if not, why? No, we have not been to Mars yet, but we want to go. We've been, as humans, we have been on the moon, and that's the farthest we've gone. We've sent probes and robots out onto pretty much every planet, and even some of the moons of other planets. But we've only gone to the moon because space is really big and really far away, and we haven't had adequate technology yet to be able to survive the long mission to Mars. So right now, with the current technology, the trip to Mars could take 6 months to a couple years. And so we need to make sure that we have everything we could survive to live on the spacecraft that goes to Mars, and then to be able to survive the harsh Martian environment. And some people believe that we just now have the capabilities to do that trip. And people like Elon Musk want to go to Mars with humans. So that might happen in the next 10 years. Anthony says, how long from Earth to Pluto by rocket? Well, we have put a spacecraft in space to go past Pluto to look at it. The New Horizons spacecraft took 9.5 years to get there. So that's currently how long it takes to get to Pluto, almost 10 years. Nolan asks, how do you make it back down from space to Earth? That question has a couple answers. It used to be that we, through NASA in the US, had the space shuttle system, and that was something that looked more like an airplane, and when it came back down to Earth, it would land like an airplane. But those are decommissioned right now. They're not in service. So right now, kind of the only way for astronauts to get up and down from Earth into space is through the Soyuz rocket and return capsule. And so they have to get in this tiny little capsule that I think like only 2 people can fit in. And it almost looks like a giant ball. I was watching a video of it, and it falls to Earth, and then once it gets to a certain height above Earth, it releases a parachute. And so then the parachute slows it down as it falls to Earth. So maybe not as nice of a landing as the space shuttle. Claire asks, do meteors hit Mars, and how many hit in a month? So I had to research this. Apparently there are about 200 meteor impacts a year on Mars, which averages about 17 meteors hitting per month. Kennedy asks, why is Pluto sometimes considered a planet? So here's some of the research I did for that. Pluto was discovered in 1930, and that was a long time ago. In 12 years, 1930 will be 100 years ago. And at that point, our technology was not as advanced as it is today, and we didn't know how many other objects there were out there, like other moons. We didn't realize how many moons Jupiter and Saturn had, and how many other objects were near Pluto in its orbit. So Pluto is obviously the farthest thing out in orbit from the sun with respect to all the other planets, and it's in a region called the Kuiper Belt, and there's actually a bunch of other rocks and things that are out there. And Pluto is, in 2005, I think, in 2005, astronomers found another object in that Kuiper Belt next to Pluto that was bigger than Pluto. 27% bigger than Pluto, and they named this object Eris, E-R-I-S. And now, because they found something bigger than Pluto, they started to think, well, maybe Pluto shouldn't be considered a planet. From 1930 to 2005, a lot of other things have been discovered. Other aspects of Pluto that make astronomers and scientists think it's not a planet are the fact that all the planets orbit in a circle that's like on a flat plane called the ecliptic, and Pluto's orbit is 17 degrees off of that plane. And most of these planets orbit in that ecliptic in a big circle, so imagine kind of like a round dinner plate, and Pluto's orbit is not only skewed at an angle, but it's also much longer and more like an egg shape or more elliptical. So it's a bit strange. It's very different from the other planets, and it's very small. So now people are calling it a dwarf planet, and they've created new categories of planets. Dwarf planet was not even a thing that existed until the past 10 years or so. So Aiden asks, how many people work for NASA? Apparently, In 2018, there are 17,336 people working for NASA. I wonder how often that number changes. So NASA asks, how many of your missions failed? Currently, my company has no failed missions. We're a pretty small and new company, so we haven't been around that long, but we've been pretty successful so far. Nick asks, how long does it take to build a spacecraft? Well, that depends on what you build. There's a lot of different things that you can build, and there are very different sizes and complexities. So the smallest things you can build are these things called CubeSats that are like literally like a cube like this big that you could hold in your hand. And there are even kits online that you could buy that give you the baseline chassis for it, or like the structure, and then you can add on your sensors and other things you want. And you could build up one of those with a group of friends or like a school group in maybe a year or so. But some spacecraft have taken like 10 years. Let's see, larger satellites have taken a decade. Apparently the International Space Station is continuously being built in space for like 15 years, and it's still probably not complete. So it really depends. The really big telescopes and things that are up there take like 10 years or more to make. Emily asks, how did people discover that space was a thing? That's a really difficult question to answer because humans have known about some aspects of space for thousands of years, and our understanding is slowly evolving over time. Ancient hunter-gatherers were able to see the stars and the moon and the sun as they change throughout the day and the week and the month and the year. And they noticed planets as things that look like stars, except you could predict over time where they were in the sky. Whereas stars, a lot of them, throughout a person's life, may look like they're in the exact same place every single day. So our first understanding of planets were stars that seemed to move in a weird way over time. Now, just even thinking about that made some people realize that maybe the stars aren't just holes in the sky, that there's a big blanket over the sky and the stars are just holes in it, but maybe there's actually three-dimensionality and things out there in space. Just, we used to think that all of Earth was just, there was just a giant dome covering our world and there was nothing out there. So the things that we know have been gradually evolving over time, especially with technology. We're able to see more and more things out there. Next question. Sophia, have you ever been in a rocket? No, I have not. If I was in a rocket and I got high enough up in the air, then I would be considered an astronaut, and I'm not an astronaut yet. Riley asks, how close can you get to the sun without getting hurt? This is very interesting because apparently NASA is creating a spacecraft that they want to fly really close to the sun. So, the sun, the distance from the sun to the Earth is 93 million miles. And this spacecraft, they're going to send 4 million miles away from the sun. So if you think of it as a fraction or a percentage, it's almost 4% of the distance. Or one metaphor I saw to get you to think about it was, if you imagine a football field, then 4 miles away is the 4-yard line, that you're like almost all the way to the touchdown area. Apparently some people think that with a spacecraft that has really good heat shielding and spacesuits that are also really well heat shielded, we could get 3 million miles away. That sounds really close compared to 93 million miles. And finally, Liam asks, can you plant a seed on Mars and then put a mask on it, and would it grow? And actually, this is something that we're very interested in learning, and there are a lot of scientists and engineers who are exploring this. And actually, the mission that my company was just successful in helping launch had a satellite on it called Eucropis, EUCROPIS, and they are trying to grow tomatoes in space. So some researchers have already determined that we can currently grow leafy greens like lettuce and kale in space on Mars with Martian soil if we gave them oxygen. But things like potatoes wouldn't grow so well. So in order to have crops grow better, we might need to add nutrients, just like a farmer adds fertilizer and other nutrients to their soil when they grow crops. So there are a lot of scientists who are currently working on figuring out what needs to be added to the soil or what would be changed, and how we could have biodomes and greenhouses on Mars growing our plants for us, because we definitely want to be able to live on Mars. Okay, here's all your answers for you. I hope that you have learned something today.